Hey, Bill. Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's class, our fourth class on Wheel of Sharp Weapons. So let's go ahead and get started, even though it's right at the hour. I think we've got a fair amount to cover tonight. So we'll start with the prayers as usual. Again, the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha we'll just do once and then go on to the mandala offering and the refuge prayer. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Again, we'll then go on to the short mandala offering. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, four continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And refuge we'll do once in English and then twice in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chanyen gipe sonam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shok Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi Daki Chanyen Gipe Sanam Gi Dola Panchir Sangye Drupar Shog. All right, let's do a short meditation. Give ourselves a chance to come into this space with a mind a little more focused, concentrated, as well as setting our motivation together. So to spend the first few minutes working with a concentration on the breath. Again, use whatever technique you prefer. And then I'll come in a few minutes and lead you in setting motivation. All right. So again, just work with this. We'll start the meditation now. Now, to set our motivation for tonight, last week we looked at the topic of karma because of the relevance to this section of the text that we're looking at. And certainly with the events that have happened in the last week in the world, we can see karma at play in terms of the various things that are going on, being a ripening of past karma, but moreover, people falling into the same habits, the same actions that got them into that predicament in the first place. And when we see this in our world, we see that beings lack the understanding of karma, or even if they have it, they often disregard it and still act out of self-cherishing, out of ignorance. It should break our hearts. It shouldn't make us cold and indifferent to the suffering of the world, but rather should ignite in us a strong desire to further our own development, to be fully dedicated to being able to help those beings, to help them to see the way in which they do create the various things that they experience, that the law of cause and effect is operating for every being, whether they are aware of it or not. They're having to be under the control of those factors. And of course, the delusions, the ignorance, it's at the root of all of that. Every being guided by self-grasping, self-cherishing, these two demons that we're referring to in this text that are the enemy. When we see this going on in others, it should, again, instill in us a very strong desire to develop our own minds completely, to become a Buddha, so we then can address the suffering of the world in a much more constructive and meaningful way. So generate the motivation of bodhicitta. It recognizes that the welfare of all of these beings in our world, of all beings everywhere, is utmost. It's the most important. Therefore, we have to become a Buddha to enact the welfare of those beings. And it's for this reason that we're here tonight, examining these teachings and trying to develop a deeper understanding of how we have to overcome our own inner demons, and then we can help others to do the same. And then you can gradually open your eyes fully, and we'll begin. Okay, so maybe I'll check in just to see, since last week we did introduce this whole topic of these verses and how these next several verses are going to play out, just to see if there are any questions about karma at this point. I know karma is like a huge topic, and I won't be able to maybe address all of our questions about that, but is there anything we need to address before we carry on with tonight's lecture and go through the verses we were going to continue with? Anything? Nanda, looks like you have a question.
Well, I do, actually, and I don't really expect an answer
Okay.
at the moment. It's not a, it's actually, I don't think it's an answerable question.
Mhm.
But when you talk about the recent events and karma ripening and
Mhm.
all the things that you just said, then I fall off this cliff that has to do with, so if a kid gets cancer or somebody gets run over by a train, or even in a collective way, the overtaking of the entire Tibetan culture by an outside force. Does that, I mean, if the Tibetans didn't have enough understanding of karma operating and they got wiped out by Chinese, what's the hope? How does that work? I mean, it's actually, it's like a huge sticking point for me personally.
Right.
About, quite honestly, about being a Buddhist.
I understand.
It's, and I'm not expecting you to dive in. I'm just saying that that's what's what this whole class is bringing up for me are these like foundational issues, questions.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway,
I hear you, Nanda. And I don't know again, yeah, that I can. And I'm glad that you don't expect that I can really address this in a definitive way. I guess one thing that I might bring up that is kind of interesting, that Venerable Rabino often brings up, maybe I even mentioned this last week, I don't recall. Last week was a bit of a blur because I felt like I was in the midst of preparing to come here to my mom's to help out and whatever. But the one thing that Venerable Rabino often talks about is the fact that we always are sort of asking, and she always gets these questions, people raising their hands and asking about these things in terms of why do bad things happen, why, and yet nobody asks why do good things happen, and it's the same principle. We have this expectation that good things are going to happen every day. We have this expectation that the world's just going to hum along and be decent and good and kind and loving. And I mean, and so far, most of us have had pretty, I don't know, kind of favored lives. We haven't maybe had horrible, horrible suffering to deal with. We've all had our share of suffering that has been challenging at times. But we do have that kind of underlying expectation that everything is going to be great, everything is going to be good. So we don't ask the question from the perspective of why do good things happen to me? We ask the questions always of why do bad things happen to me, or why do they happen to others, or whatever. We kind of get really focused on that side of it, but it's the same principle that's guiding both sides of the equation. And if we just sort of accept that there's this underwriting current and we can't always understand the dimensions of it, the extent of it, the various causes involved in it, but we can accept in our minds at least some degree of responsibility for what's going on and recognize that the Tibetans, in terms of their situation, probably looked at that reality of being invaded by China, and 52 was when it started in a more major way, and then 59 when most of them went into exile. If they look at it from that perspective of this is karma that's ripening and giving them a lesson they need to learn, well then, it changes what they do in the face of that, as opposed to holding it from the perspective of why is this happening to us? It's so unfair. We practice the Dharma for centuries and look at, this happen. I mean, I guess my comment is when it comes down to actually knowing what's the cause versus just accepting that that's the principle behind it, we can then have a very different response. If I look at the problems I have in my life, and that's what this course is to help us to kind of examine and look at. If I say I'm having these problems because of something I did, and I need to take responsibility for that, learn from that, and do something different, do something more constructive. Well, then I've gained something in terms of Buddhist practice. It should ripen eventually into better results, into future diminishment of suffering, better conditions for me to be able to continue to practice the Dharma and so on. But nonetheless, whatever happens, it's always grist for the mill. Whether it's and if it's good stuff, then we should be thinking of others and wishing for them to have that. If it's bad stuff, we should be taking it on and doing this sort of Tonglen exercise with everything. And I think we become better people on the basis of that, whether or not, I mean, I believe in karma. I certainly have a conviction in karma. Maybe as Venerable Rabina says, that's my hypothesis. That's how I go about living my life, is with the understanding that karma is operative. But whether or not it's operative, I think I still benefit from being a person who's aware in a deeper way of the harm that I might be causing to others and how I'm experiencing that back on myself. So therefore, I cease that harm. I stop engaging in those actions. And even if I don't have the karmic benefit of that, which again, I have conviction is there, it's still worthwhile because I'm not entangled in messes with everyone around me. you know, I just look at the situation, and I'm not going to go down the whole political thing of Israel and Palestine and Hamas and all these various factions, because and we dealt with them in the United States with Al Qaeda and 9/11 and all these things. The pathway of revenge and retaliation and violence, it just doesn't get us anywhere. I posted on my Facebook page the quote from the Dhammapada, where the Buddha says, and I'm going to say a slightly different version than what's on my Facebook page, but it's hatred never ceases by hatred, but by love alone is healed. This is the ancient and eternal law. And that's Jack Kornfield's translation of that. But, that makes me feel good when I think in those ways, when I think I'm going to combat hatred with love. I'm not going to combat hatred with more hatred. Whether or not that's the karmic, principle that's going to play out and I'll only get harmed because I'm harming others, it still makes sense to me to work with love in the face of hatred, to not be blind to the effects of having a more loving mind in that moment, regardless of what happens karmically. So that's how I try to work with it at times. Though, as I said, I have a pretty deep conviction that karma is operative and is a good way to live one's life, attending to that principle. But I think it's good in the moment. I think there is that benefit that we feel less agitation with everything around us because we always go back to being a sort of ambassador of love. We just continue to have loving thoughts towards beings. There's a wonderful quote from Kunu Lama Rinpoche, who taught the Dalai Lama on uh, the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, Shantideva's text. He says, anyone we meet is of two different types. We either meet somebody who has realized reality, who has realized emptiness, who has overcome that root of self-grasping and is on their way out of here or beyond that. And then we should be like prostrating at their feet. That's the only response that is, appropriate for somebody who has realized reality. The second option is we meet somebody who hasn't realized reality and therefore is under the control of their karma and delusions. And he says they're only a source of compassion. Anybody in that category is only a source of compassion. Why? Because they haven't realized that. And as I was saying in the motivation tonight, if they haven't even realized the truth of karma and cause and effect and how that is playing out in regard to their actions and what they are experiencing, that's another form of ignorance. And we should have, again, even deeper compassion for beings who don't have that knowledge and that awareness, aren't living their lives from that principle. So I think these are the places I go to, is like, if an understanding of karma helps me to be more compassionate, more responsive to the world in ways that don't aggravate and cause people and other beings, problems and difficulties and harm, go back to that basic principle of Buddhism, which is ahimsa, non-harmfulness. Well, then that's fine, and if the teachings on karma produce more confusion, then maybe you have to again go back to that place of saying, but what is it all rooted in? In my mind, it's really all rooted in that. That we just have to live our lives without stepping on everybody's toes, without doing things that cause agony and pain and anguish for other beings. So I hope that helps a little. Maybe that gives some context. Yeah. Okay, Nanda, great. Anyone else before we go back to the verses? I've decided to kind of, approach all of that in the motivation tonight because I know it's on a lot of our minds and there's a lot of mixed feelings about it, and in our world, obviously, people feel, we have to go bomb all these people that bomb the people that we care about or whatever. And I get that mentality, but I just can't sign up. I mean, it just doesn't work. We know it doesn't work because it's been going on for the entire history of humanity. So anyway. All right, let's get into the verses and let me pull up the slides first. I think we'll do that. We're in this section again that is from verse 10 through 48. Last week we made it up to verse 15, 10 through 15, because I did a fair amount of explanation before we got started. I'm just going to have this one slide to kind of go back to, again, the format for the verses that we are dealing with primarily through 45. The last three verses of this section do have a slightly different format, but this is the main format we're looking at. A specific result that we are experiencing. Line B is that we acknowledge this is my karma. This is the wheel of sharp weapons coming back around to get me for having done a particular thing, which is line C. That's the specific cause of that specific result, or at least one of them. Tonight, we're going to see somewhere, I'd say it's maybe one of the possibilities. It's not necessarily exactly matched, but it's some things that can influence various results in our lives. Having that knowledge then that we have a specific cause, then we have line D, which is a very specific remedy, which is usually avoiding what got you into that situation in the first place. So if stepping in it the first time, got us a particular result, well, then we don't step in it again. We continue to avoid that, and we will see different results in our lives. That's the whole idea behind it. Okay. So I want to emphasize one thing. I mean, I actually the first time I received teachings on this was from Venerable Ling Gongkar Toku, Lama who came to Sechen Ling in San Francisco, the FPMT center there in 96, the summer of 96. And he said, and I actually meant to share this last week before we got into this section. He says, particularly in this section, he says, never take these trainings as seeing them in others. In other words, when we see various karmic results, don't necessarily be, looking at others. He says, only see them in yourself. In other words, this is a mirror. This isn't meant to be kind of a way for us to pick apart the faults of other people. Now, again, it doesn't mean that if we do see things going on in our world around them, we should totally neglect them, but we can learn from things. If we try to see things through the lens of karma, we can say, oh, this is what's happening to this being could be a product of that. And we might gain, as I said just a short while ago, a deeper compassion for those beings because of what they're experiencing, because they don't even realize that they're creating the causes again and again to continue to have that same result. That's not the objective of this text at this point, it's to make us more aware of our own faults. Again, to hold the mirror up to ourselves and say, I have that going on in my life. Where did that come from? I created that cause, and what was it? And now I need to make a deeper commitment to avoiding it. So just recognize that that's the best advice for us to follow in this. Don't go through this whole section just thinking about, oh yeah, I know somebody who's like that. Oh, I know somebody who, is creating those causes or who has that result. The whole point is to look at it from the perspective of ourselves. And if we don't find things that are working for ourselves, well, then work with whatever you are experiencing. And to some degree, try to determine what the causes might be. They're usually something very similar. Remember, the results that we're primarily looking at in that line A are things that are similar to what we've done in the past. Again, we're going to see some that are a little different than that in tonight's class, but nonetheless, most of them fall into that category. Let's go on to verse 16. Dharmarakshita says, whenever we are separated from helpful and loving friends, it is the sharp weapons of bad actions turning against us for having enticed others' servants away from them. Now we should no longer part others from their servants. I use this word servants a lot. I don't know. I mean, if in the culture at the time, maybe this was something that was more common and what have you. I mean, many of us may have people that might clean our house or do some tasks, for us that we appreciate them doing. But I don't think any of us have really like servants, people that, are in servitude to us. So I think it's important that we take this in the other translations, make this like your entourage or your companions. It's the idea of anybody who is in your immediate circle. So let's go ahead and go to our text so we can go through the commentary on this. And for this, we have, again, we're on page 7 at the bottom. It says, therefore, whenever, due to their having gone far away, having died, and so forth, the suffering arises of being separated from friends who were helpful to us and close to our heart, reflect on it, thinking that this has happened to me is the ripening of the results of the bad actions committed in previous rebirths, of methodically separating a Lama's disciples as well as other servants, students, and so forth, and enticing them to my side. So the idea here is that we have spent time creating the karma of separating others from the people that are dear to them or that they depend upon. And thereby we are experiencing those people being parted from us, that we are separated from them through the force of those past actions. And then Geshe Jampa Gyatso continues, he says, then as before, meditate on taking and giving. We should think, from now on, I will never part, that is, separate others' disciples, servants, students, and so forth from their proper place, and will never entice them to my side. So, we may have in particular done this sort of thing in regard to maybe they could recall when we were in high school, perhaps we got jealous of people having people that we would rather have as friends. And so we enticed them into our camp so that they could be our friends. And we're kind of glad that the other people didn't have those people as friends anymore. I mean, hopefully as adults, we've grown out of those sorts of patterns, but we might be doing some things very subtly that disconnect people from others, divide them. And that's not a very good karma to create. Again, we should be happy, even if we hear that one of our friends has made a friendship with somebody who we can't stand or have an ill feeling about. We should still rejoice that they're seeing something positive in that person, that they're getting something beneficial. So rejoicing is going to be something that also is a nice remedy to a lot of this. Doing Tonglen is an important practice, but we're even going to see this come up in some of the commentaries, that if we can actually rejoice in the good fortune of others at times rather than doing negative things to them because we're jealous or we're annoyed or whatever. So that's another thing to kind of pay attention to. I don't think that I have any slides after this, but let me check and make sure. No. Let's go ahead and then read 17 from this. Whenever all the holy ones are unhappy with us, it is the sharp weapons of bad actions turning against us for having rejected the holy and relied upon bad friends. Now we should reject bad friends. These bad friends are again going to be explained in a little more detail in a moment. I'll come back to the slides and have a few additional comments on them. But this is an important feature of the Dharma, is that to some degree, and again, depends upon the strength of our own minds, because some of us have the ability through our practice and through our dedication to the Dharma to be around people who might be misleading. They often use that term instead of bad friends, misleading friends who could kind of take you down the bad path. People who have an influence on you in a negative way, getting you to do things that are not so wholesome or so good for your Dharma practice, staying out late at night, going to various functions and events where you might drink too much or whatever the case might be. Those are the sorts of things that we do want to avoid as we get into Dharma practice. I might mention from my own experience, when I first found the Dharma, I certainly had a lot of people in my life that I wouldn't, again, it's hard to call them bad friends. They're just people who have a lifestyle that is not really as conducive to the practice of the Dharma as what I was looking for. But I found that I didn't need to sort of slam the door on them. I didn't need to kind of say, sorry, you're out of my life now, don't call me ever again. But rather, through the force of your practice, this is what I found at least, is that they start falling by the wayside simply because you're not doing as many things with them, because you're not as interested in what they were interested in, and they go elsewhere. They find other people that they enjoy being with and doing those things with. So I think the one thing that's being emphasized throughout this is we don't really lose our compassion or concern for them. We just recognize that their influence on us at times, again, when our practice is fairly weak, might be a little challenging, and so therefore we make the decision not to be around them. So let's look at what Geshe Jampa Gyatso says on page 8. He says here, the holy ones are holy beings such as lamas and so forth. Whenever, no matter how much we respectfully bow down to them and so forth, it seems as though they are not pleased with us, and fingers are pointed at us without our having disrespected our lamas. So we get this kind of bad rep, and nobody's really attending to us in the way that we would like. They're disregarding us, maybe even saying negative things about us, you know. Uh, you know, again, without our having disrespected our lamas, held wrong views about them, and so forth. The truth is that in previous rebirths, although we met holy beings, it was as if we did not meet them, or although we met them, we forsook them without following them and instead relied upon bad friends. So again, even though it might be that we're not engaging in those sorts of actions right now, even though we might be very good about trying to be keeping a good relationship with our gurus, our lamas, and other people, we have to recognize that if we're having those kinds of conflicts with them now and things are not going smoothly, it must have been a karma we created in the past, where we were paying more attention to and trying to be around those beings who were not good friends, who were misleading us to some degree. So we have to make a deeper commitment to engaging in wholehearted devotion, dedication to the people who support us on our path, especially our gurus. Then it says, moreover, the bad friends of this context are mainly those bad friends who have come under the influence of considering their own welfare alone. We're going to look in a moment, we'll see that we can even understand bad friends as an internal enemy that we have to overcome, namely the twin demons. But nonetheless, we can see that this is what makes someone misleading often, is that they're guided by their own self-cherishing. They're guided by their desire to obtain what it is that they want and disregard the needs of others. So then Geshe-la says, reflecting on this, thinking, this is the sharp weapons turning against me of the bad actions that came from following those people, those misguided friends. Then think, from now on, although out of mercy it would not be suitable to mentally give up such bad friends, I should keep compassion for them and so on, I will not associate with them directly, and I will never come under their influence, and meditate on taking and giving again those beings who have a similar problem, not having good relationships with their gurus, having fingers pointed at us, being disrespected to some degree. We should recognize that that comes from the similar type of cause. When others are experiencing it, we can take that on ourselves. We can give them all the things that would be useful for them to have, meaningful relationships with their gurus and things going smoothly in terms of their Dharma practice and so on. So let me share a few things that are additional comments that you may have read if you're reading Peacock and the Poison Grove. He says, when we talk about bad associates, for at least Geshe Sopa, he says the principal ones we are referring to are your inner companions. And we are talking about the view of a real personal identity. Again, that's what the term that's often used in that translation for self-grasping, and the self-cherishing attitude that led to the commission of these previous bad actions. Again, those are the real misleading companions, are those states of mind that we follow quite readily. But again, the external beings are an important thing to pay attention to as well. He says on a more mundane level, there are those of our friends who are hostile to religious practice and wholesome conduct, again, because they are so misguided by their own delusions, self-cherishing, self-grasping, and so on. Recognizing that your present bad situation is a result of your previous actions, you should vow that from now on, you will forsake all bad associations. This does not mean that you should hate such people, he clarifies, but that you will not follow them in a negative direction. Instead, you should use love and compassion to help them change in a positive way. As I said earlier, that quote from Kunu Lama Rinpoche, you still have compassion for these beings because you see how misguided they are, how much they're following their twin demons, and even blind to any sort of religious practice, perhaps, or spiritual practice that would help them. I wanted to share this. I found this quote really quite interesting. Acho Rinpoche. This is a text that was translated by Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and he taught on it at times. But he says, there's no difference between male and female as evil friends of negative karma who make you lose this and all future lives. And his statement is, therefore, throw them far away like a stone used for cleaning your bottom. I guess we would say in modern times, like used toilet paper. But the idea here is that that sounds pretty like awful, like you're really, kind of casting them away in a really negative light, like they're used toilet paper. But the idea is that just in the same way that we throw something away and discard it because we see it's no longer useful and not really that pleasant to be around, we want to have a similar type of attitude towards these misleading friends. Again, not because we hate them and we have, disdain for them and we're wishing them ill, but rather because we see that our spiritual practice depends upon having a clearer pathway and that they are going to be distracting to that. Again, we do it always with compassion, and maybe do even special dedications for them if they are somebody in particular who we know is headed down a pathway that's only going to lead to more suffering. They are even greater objects of compassion for us, and we want to do even deeper prayers and dedications for them. So that's the idea behind this, is that we have to find a way to steer clear of people without, again, making it into a huge deal. We'd rather just see that this is what we need to do to protect our own minds. And then at some point, perhaps we can be around those people again with a greater strength of mind. Verse 18, whenever negativities and so forth, due to others' exaggeration and deprecation occur, it is the sharp weapons of bad actions turning against us for having disparaged holy beings. Now we should abandon disparaging others with exaggeration and deprecation. Exaggeration is where we're fabricating things about somebody. So in the case of us being on the receiving end of that, it means that somebody might, say our faults are so much greater than they are. And so they're exaggerating how we are. And so that we end up facing that, people talking about us in a really negative light because we've been the victim of that. Or they might deprecate or denigrate our qualities and call us again as being much, much less than what we currently are. So we have these kinds of two possibilities. They're either exaggerating what is bad about us or deprecating what is good about us. That's because we've done the same in regard to others. Again, that's often the case with these, is that a similar behavior ripens into that type of a result. So what Geshe-Jampa Gyatso says, whenever exaggeration and deprecation senselessly occur in that, even though we did not do any faulty action whatsoever, others say, you did this and that. So again, they exaggerate some of these negative things that we've done. This is the sharp weapons turning against us of the bad actions committed in previous rebirths of reviling and deprecating holy beings, exaggerating with respect to them, and so forth. Therefore, from now on, we should not do actions that disparage others with exaggeration and deprecation. So once more, the idea here is that we can do a lot of harmful things in terms of our way of talking about others and holding others. The best way is to have some humility and just recognize that everyone is a being that we should be concerned about, that we shouldn't try to do anything to harm. Certainly when it comes to holy beings, we have to hold them in a very high light with great humility and not in any way try to exaggerate faults or deprecate their good qualities. So again, I think that's probably a pretty straightforward one. There's really not too much to say about that. My teacher, Geshe-Jampa Gyatso, he says, in short, we need to control our own mind. We do not need to control other people, or try to put them in a box or say things about them that have a negative impact on their lives. Try to kind of keep things to ourselves and work on our own minds. So verse 19, whenever our necessary articles go to waste, it is the sharp weapons of bad actions turning against us for having disregarded others' needs. Now we should accomplish the needs of others. So in this case, the things that we need, that are our necessities, actually go to waste. They disappear. They lose their quality, whatever the case might be. We can't rely upon them anymore. Why? Because we've disregarded others' needs, the necessities that they need to have. So certainly when we look at what's going on now, mentioning that earlier in terms of what's happening in Israel and Gaza and what have you, if we just totally neglect the needs of people at the time, especially if you were somebody there locally and somebody who could, make a big difference in terms of offering things to others who don't have much, well, then that's creating that type of karma, to have your own resources and the things that you need go to waste and to not be able to be relied upon. So again, that's the type of karma that we're looking at. Let's take a look at what Geshe-Jampa Gyatso says in his commentary on this. Whenever, through not having acted as a good owner, necessary articles such as our offering substances and so forth go to waste, we should think that this too is the bad actions committed in previous rebirths turning against us. These bad actions are disregarding others' needs, that is, separating them from their wealth, enjoyments, servants, and so forth, and then taking control of them, as well as acting with disregard for others, or thinking, may whatever excellences exist arise for me. Although they do not arise for others, this does not matter. Again, when we revert to that self-cherishing mind that thinks it only matters for us and those I care about, it doesn't matter for anyone else. Then, from now on, we should abandon the bad mind that thinks, may all excellences arise for me, and actually accomplish all necessary things for others in accordance with their needs, as well as having a good disposition that also accomplishes them mentally. So again, this is something that we can take to heart. If we do have a situation, even when this happens only occasionally, where the necessities that we have spoil, are lost to us, whatever, we can see that that's a reflection of the degree to which we have tended to the needs of others. And again, this is how karma works. And many of these, as I said, are pretty straightforward in terms of kind of how we can see these results in our life as a reflection of what we must have done. By not tending to the needs of others, our own needs are unfulfilled. Geshe Japa Gyatso, again, in his commentary on this commentary, does talk about even having jealousy towards others. I mentioned earlier this practice of rejoicing, which is the antidote to jealousy. Oftentimes, when we look at other people with great amounts of resources, especially those who have a lot more resources than we possess, we become very jealous and kind of even have this mindset. Even if you're aware of karma, you might think, well, God, they don't seem like they're that great of people. Why do they have all the stuff that they have? How did they create all of that? We have to remember that they created that through the force of their own merit. As we talked about last week, the karma of generosity is that then we have resources. So if people are in this life with a lot of resources, whether they're born into them, they inherit them, or whether they've accumulated them through their own efforts in terms of, you know, businesses they've created or what have you, they still are only getting those results through the force of their karma of the past, their karma of generosity in particular. So when we see that in others, we should be rejoicing. That's another thing that kind of helps create us having what we need in our life, is rejoicing when others have things in their life. Because again, whether they're using those things to their benefit or not in this life isn't the issue. There are many people who are born into all of that and never use those resources for meaningful, purposeful things. They just, waste them on luxuries in this life. But they still must have created those through the force of their generosity. Again, another puzzling thing about karma that to Nanda's question earlier, that's very hard to figure out, how do beings end up in a good situation through the force of their prior generosity, but they're not generous people. Well, the generosity karma of them practicing that has perhaps not ripened yet, or maybe that ripened earlier on, and now they are, trying to kind of just take care of themselves, and they haven't really learned how to be kind and generous with the resources they have. So it's unfortunate when that happens. So again, this is another thing that we have to remind ourselves of when we do see things in others. That's another karma that we create when we rejoice in people having what they need, having what they want. If you don't have for example, again, going back to what's going on in Israel, if you don't have the money to give at this time to benefit others, to give to the Red Cross or whoever is going over there, Doctors Without Borders, people who are probably tending to a lot of suffering over there, then rejoice that that's happening. Rejoice in the people that are giving the money. Rejoice in the people that are doing these good works. We can always do that. Every day we can rejoice in so much. You don't have to wait for like the little bit of the evening news where they talk about some good thing that somebody's doing on the planet, and then you can go, oh, I can rejoice now. There's somebody good out there. There's good happening every day, right? Just open our minds and rejoice. So let me see. I don't think, again, there was much more to share on these. I think we're up to 20 now, I think. Yeah. So whenever we have a joyless mind and an unclear heart, it is the sharp weapons of bad actions turning against us for having accumulated negativities in other rebirths. Now we should eliminate the conditions for others' negativities. Again, this one has this idea of like by accumulating a sort of negative state of mind and negative actions that ensue from that, this kind of takes the joy out of our life. It gives us those moments and sometimes huge periods of our life where we don't really have a lot of joy and instead have more suffering mind. And again, mental states are also a product of our karma. Let's take a look at what Geshe Japa Gyatso says on this in his commentary. He says, this is page 9, I believe. He says, in a mind that is senselessly without joy, intense suffering arises. The heart is unclear when, for example, no matter what one does, when meditating on a deity, one is unable to make it dawn clearly to one's mind, and it is like groping in pitch darkness. Again, they're using a example of some of our practice when we're trying to meditate. In this case, it's a tantric meditation on the deity that we're trying to visualize, but our mind is like murky and dark, and we just can't bring any of that kind of joy and light into our practice. When this happens, we tend to say this too is the harm of evil spirits, the malice of the Dharma protectors, and so forth. But even though there does exist harm by evil spirits, the main evil spirit is the harm of self cherishing. Again, that has caused us to create actions that are ripening into those experiences. Might point out while we're on the topic of Dharma protectors that I didn't mention this earlier. That's actually what Dharma Rakshita, the author of our text, that's what his name means. Of course, Dharma is Dharma, Rakshita is protector. So he's actually called a Dharma protector. But Dharma protectors do exist, and they can be, again, something we want to be on the good side of and try to benefit from. And then, of course, there can be, evil spirits, these sorts of things. Tibetans have no, problem accepting these sorts of things. In our culture, we may not accept them quite as readily. But that's not the main fault. The main fault is our own self-cherishing and the karma we've created through that. As he goes on to say, under its power, we accumulated only negative actions, due to which the Dharma protectors and so forth are not pleased with us. Thus, the malice of Dharma protectors also exists. Nonetheless, we should not run to others saying it is like this, but instead think the truth is that this is the sharp weapons turning against me, of the bad actions committed in previous rebirths under the power of self-cherishing, of accumulating only negative actions without doing virtuous actions. We gave more attention to the negative, mundane, worldly actions than we did to our Dharma practice. Therefore, from now on, I must abandon ever doing anything that becomes a condition for others' negativities. That is, I will never make others engage in negative actions in dependence on myself. In other words, I won't become the instigator of initiating negative actions so others follow along and what have you. But the focus here too is also on even the negative actions we ourselves engage in. And then he says, not only that, we should also constantly do the practice of taking and giving. Again, we get reminded of that occasionally, but remember that's part of the verse. The verse says in the initial part of it that we should have a remedy to that. That's line D. And we should, even though it's not stated in every verse, Tonglen should be one of our main antidotes. That whenever things are happening negative to us, such as those moments when we have a lack of clarity and focus in our Dharma practice, even one example that was pointed out, I think by Venerable Chodron, she says, we might have a lot of energy for engaging in lots of entertainment. That if Netflix has something really good on, we have no problem staying up into the wee hours, to binge watch all these various things. But if you were to try to practice Dharma for that duration of time, read, study, meditate, whatever, we wouldn't have the time and energy for it. That's indicative of how we have become accustomed to more negative, mundane, worldly activities that just create more attachment and craziness. Again, if we think about it, self-cherishing plays a very subtle role sometimes in these things, but it's there. It makes us think about what I need and the comfort of my life right now and my attachment to my worldly things, and doesn't make me think about creating the causes to be able to benefit others in a much more lasting way. And instead, I get caught up in all of that kind of nonsense. I do have some quotes from her, and this may even be where she mentions this. Seeing the unhappiness we experience due to these actions, we make the determination to shun enabling others' destructive actions. We decline to get entangled in their non-virtuous activities and don't dream up ones of our own that we get them involved with. They don't need any help. We don't need to come up with all sorts of negative things for others to engage in as well. In fact, we do the opposite and encourage others to do constructive actions and to use their talents to benefit others. I think this is pointing out something that's really important for me to emphasize on this, is that oftentimes when we talk about karma, and in this text we are seeing it, that we're often getting that advice of stop doing the negative thing that got you into trouble in the first place, right? So if we see a result like we're seeing in this text, and then we say, oh, the cause was this, and the action is to abandon doing that, Well, that's great. And that's always the first step, right? Stop doing this crazy stuff that was going to only cause you suffering. And it's just ridiculous. We just keep, again, doing it over and over again. But we can also kind of take another dimension to it. And this is maybe even kind of more of a bodhisattva kind of mentality to some degree. We want to see about what's the more constructive thing we can engage in. For example, again, like the previous one where we talked about our resources, not being always there and the diminishment of those because we haven't attended to the necessities of others. I mean, we really have to think about going up above and beyond and not just kind of tending to things in a really cursory way, but how do we create the kind of karma that is the generous mind that is constantly tending to the necessities and needs of other beings. Again, some of us do this better than others, but we all have to kind of be about changing our actions in a more constructive way. So here the idea is stop leading everybody into bad actions through our own negative influence, but moreover try to lead them into more constructive actions. Then you'll have benefit for all. I mean, you will be creating the karma of helping others to practice virtue. I know that can be challenging. I even had one student one time who said they were in a workplace where even just engaging in negative talk around the lunchroom table was so difficult to avoid. Yeah, they'd sit down to have lunch together because that's the situation there. And they didn't live in it was like some sort of a factory or some sort of setting where didn't have the opportunity to go out for lunch and separate from people so much. So they're like in the lunchroom and you're sitting at a table with people and all they're talking about is negative stuff. And I suggested, I don't know if it really worked or not. I mean, maybe try to find some interesting things, stories that could, from the news or whatever, that could maybe change the conversation into a more constructive way. You don't have to sit there and say, hey, folks, let's talk about virtue for a while or something. You just introduce a topic that's at least going to get them, moving in a slightly different direction. Something that might be kind of subtly moving them into that. And I don't know, again, I don't know how much luck people have with that sort of thing because it's challenging. Our job is not necessarily to change other beings, especially when we lack the ability and the skill. That's why we're working on ourselves. But if we can introduce things into people's lives that in a subtle way cause them to think about things. I mean, the one example I gave was something I'd heard on the news about a man who had a decision that he made just out of the blue. He decided he was going to give one of his kidneys. He had two healthy kidneys. He's going to give it as a donation to whoever, wants to receive it. And I think his thinking was that he was hoping it would cause like a chain of donated kidneys, that he would donate to a kidney to somebody, that person, whoever was in their immediate circle, might have somebody who would donate a kidney, and it would become this like pay it forward kidney deal. So, but I mean, that's an interesting question to bring up to people. What do people think about that? Would you give a kidney to a stranger? Why or why not? I mean, and that might kind of change a conversation in hopefully a more positive way. Maybe a lot of people would start saying some negative things, but maybe there'd be enough people who would challenge that and get into a whole discussion about generosity, especially of our bodies, of vital organs, what have you. So anyway, it's I don't know, kind of an interesting thought, I thought. But let's go back to the slides. I think I may have one or two other things. She says, additionally, with all these verses, remember to do the taking and giving meditation. I added this in just to make sure that we remind ourselves of this. It's been in a few of the commentaries by Geshe-la. He says, in this verse, specifically, we take on the suffering of people who fail in their endeavors and feel deeply perturbed, frustrated, and misunderstood, because that's, again, a similar type of karma. People who are kind of finding that they don't have much joy in their mind because they feel like life's kind of against them and what have you. It might not be practicing Dharma and meditation and having difficulty, but it's a similar type of result. Then it says, whoops. We transform our body, possessions. Whoops, maybe I skipped one here. No, I didn't. We transform our body, possessions, and merit into what they require to actualize their virtuous aims and take delight in envisioning their success, including their successful Dharma practice, which brings them lasting happiness. So even again, if they aren't practicing Dharma, we can wish for them to have that. We can give them what we have, take away all of that frustration and suffering, and give them complete success in their Dharma practice, getting everything that they need to be able to have positive results in their life. Okay. So I think that was it. Let's go to verse 21. Whenever unsuccessful in our activities, our mind is agitated. It is the sharp weapon of bad actions turning against us for having obstructed the actions of the holy ones. Now we should abandon all such interferences. I hope I didn't. I may have actually taken that verse from, because I just mentioned a couple of weeks ago. Remember that in Good Karma, she's like one verse behind us because of the thing that Thupten Jinpa did with that one verse. I may have put that commentary from Good Karma with the wrong verse, but anyway, the idea is that with that taking and giving practice, whatever is going on for anyone, we want to kind of take that on and give them all of our happiness so they can have better results in their life. So anyway, I might have done that with some of these when I was preparing for tonight. Verse 21, let's see what Geshe-la says. Here we're lined up definitely with the verse that I just said. To be unsuccessful in activities is having been permitted by our parents and so forth from the time we were a small child to go to school, rather than culminating our studies, we did the opposite. That is, we did nothing but engage in wrongful activities. Whenever our mind becomes agitated, for instance, due to ourselves and others not accomplishing a planned activity, think, this is definitely the result of the bad actions turning against me, of, in previous rebirths, obstructing the actions of the holy ones, that is, obstructing holy beings from teaching the Dharma, as well as hindering other people from doing their daily recitations, studying, meditating, and so forth. So when we have kind of these obstacles of lacking success in our own activities, it's because we put up obstacles to others, especially, again, the karma we create around holy ones, beings who are gurus and so on, keeping them from teaching the Dharma or doing things that are beneficial. That's a really powerful negative karma. But even hindering ordinary people, people who are practicing, trying to do good things with their lives, what have you. He goes on to say, without their engaging in doing those activities, I entice them to the side of non-dharma. I guess the idea here is that we've been kind of the bad friend, the misleading friend, the obstacle, the person who was not doing the appropriate thing in regard to what's going on with the other person. From now on, in addition to not obstructing others, even in the slightest, from doing virtuous actions, we should try to increase them more and more through rejoicing, expressing praise, and so forth. So it is important, again, that we do acknowledge other people and the virtue that they engage in. If we hear of other people doing wonderful things with their life or even with their resources, with whatever they have, we should say how good that is that they do that and rejoice in our own minds at the actions that others do that are virtuous and wholesome. This is how we accumulate our own merit by rejoicing in them. We kind of accentuate that and collect that, but we also get acclimated to that state of mind that really delights in virtue. And again, rejoicing is an important practice for all of us to do because it keeps us enthused about practicing the Dharma. I don't know if there's much more to say on this. Again, some of these things we might find as we're going through them, we might say, well, I'm not really experiencing that so much right now, but, or I'm not really doing the action right now that seems to be behind all of this. But recall that, again, we have like this whole thing of karma not necessarily ripening in this life. Things we might be experiencing now could be the product of many lifetimes, or some things that we're doing right now, we might not see those actions ripen in this life. They're only going to come to fruition in future lives. So we have to have that kind of mindful awareness that this is not always a mirror that's holding us up to us and saying, oh, I'm doing this right now. It's, oh, I must have done that in the past. Therefore, again, I have to be attentive to that, try to break any patterns that might still be there, even if I don't feel like I'm engaging in that to a large degree, and also make a commitment to purifying, right? Again, using the four opponent powers as a means to be able to curtail the unfavorable effects of those actions. Okay, let's just go to this verse 22. Whenever our Lama is not pleased, no matter what we do, it is the sharp weapons of bad actions turning against us for having acted hypocritically toward the holy Dharma. we should work to reduce our hypocrisy regarding the Dharma. This is about us becoming kind of duplicitous, about us giving lip service to being a practitioner of the Dharma, while in our own minds we know that we're not. We're not really doing what we're kind of professing to do or giving the appearance of doing. And that ripens into our Lama, our teachers, whatever, not being pleased no matter what we do. Because, of course, how our actions are is actually very different to what we are demonstrating, what we are putting on airs about. So I think that's it for that in terms of the slides. I don't have anything else to share there, but let's go to Geshe-la's commentary and see what he says about that verse. Whenever, due to our unskillful behavior and the like, our Lama is not pleased with us, even though we act in accordance with methods pleasing to the Lama. So again, when it says due to our unskillful behavior and the like, in the past and what have you, our Lama isn't pleased with us, even though in the moment we're acting in methods that are, pleasing to the Guru, without quarreling with the Lama, which of course would create even more negative karma. Instead, think this is definitely retribution for having acted hypocritically toward the holy Dharma in my previous rebirths. The way in which I did this is that, behaving like a heron or a cat, I acted hypocritically through externally acting as though I were subdued, while engaging in nothing but bad conduct, not on the side of the Dharma. Therefore, this is the sharp weapons of the bad actions of acting like this descending upon me. From now on, without acting hypocritically regarding the Dharma, we should ensure that there is congruence between the external and the internal. So again, this idea of being kind of hypocritical or having some duplicity, not really, being genuine in our the appearance that we give to others versus our actual practice, is an important part of kind of keeping our genuine sense of who we are in line, rather than, again, it's good maybe not to go to the opposite thing of like denigrating ourselves constantly in the face of others so that we kind of step all over our qualities. That's not important. That's not a good way to practice either. But it's important not to kind of exaggerate the qualities that we have, particularly with regard to our lamas. We kind of give that impression of we're much better practitioners than we are. Well, who's being cheated there? It's not that the lamas care one way or another, really. When it comes down to it, they probably have deeper knowledge of our faults than we do. But this is duplicitous. This is not putting on the right way of going about practicing the Dharma. It's not humble. It's not something that's genuine and sincere. This idea of the cat and the heron, I might describe what's being talked about there by Geshe Jampa Gyatso. His idea, and those of you who have cats know that cats can sometimes look like they're very still and like they aren't really that occupied with anything, but then they're just waiting for like a mouse or a bird or something to move, and then they immediately pounce on it. So it's like they have this ulterior thing going on, that they're just pretending to be all calm and still while they are actually after another animal to kill it or play with it or whatever. And it's the same with a heron. Apparently a heron will stand in the water where they can look down and see the fish in the water, and they pretend to be very, very still and kind of calm and what have you, and then they immediately will strike and retrieve, get the fish and eat the fish. So this is how Geshe-la described it, and so probably did a better job than me, but nonetheless, that's the idea behind it. We don't want to have this kind of airs like, oh, we're such a great practitioner and everything is so wonderful and what have you. I'll tell you the little story I have about this. That I don't know, it was humbling to me to hear this from Venerable Rabina. When I was going off to the master's program in 1997, I was preparing to leave in January of 98 to go study for 7 years over in Italy. She was asking me, she came to Seichen Ling for teaching, and I was there ahead of time to sit with her for a bit. And she said, so Don, how's it going? How are things happening with, you're getting ready to go and everything. And I said, well, actually, everything's going really fine. And my job is working out, wrapping up nicely. And things are happening with the home there and with the move and da-da-da-da. And I mean, and I kept talking about how everything was going so well. And then she looked at me and she says, well, if things are going that well, either you're a Buddha or you're not practicing hard enough. I just said, well, I know what the answer to that question is. I'm certainly not a Buddha. So, we have to, again, be careful about like not taking this sort of false pride even in thinking that, things are going pretty well. Da, 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 da. I mean, who's to say what's going well? But Venerable Urbina was very quick to kind of rub my nose in it and say, no, 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 don't think that things are going that well because you're still here in a suffering form. So anyway, let's go back to this one.
I think Venerable Robina is that guru for all of us.
I think so too. She has
So
she has that way of kind of like cracking
apparently
right
we're
through.
all in that same boat.
you know Make sure that we have no hypocrisy whatsoever with her, because if you don't sort of lay it all on the line with her, she'll see through it anyway. So yeah, she's very good at that, and I appreciate that. I mean, because it is good, it's very humbling. It kind of like puts you in your place and just goes, okay, I have to admit, yeah. Anyway, all
Yes,
right, yeah, it's really good. It's the best medicine. So let's go on to verse 23. Whenever it happens that we are contradicted by everyone, it is the sharp weapons of bad actions turning against us for having scorned shame and embarrassment. Now we should shun that which is improper. So this is talking about these two mental factors. Here they're called shame and embarrassment. It's kind of a shame that they use shame and embarrassment for these two, because there's much better terminology. These kind of go back to when I think they translated the Lowrick, the 51 mental factors. Some of you may have studied all of this. They gave some names for some of these that I don't think really capture the full spirit of them. These are kind of the ways that we avoid improper behavior. They're a very virtuous mental factor, and shame and embarrassment don't sound that virtuous. But the idea is that shame, if we think of it as self-respect or integrity, and this is integrity, I think, is what Venerable Chodron uses. The idea is that we have a mind that wants to uphold a particular way of being in the world. And that is a really powerful mind. If we think at the moment, oh, this isn't really becoming of me. This isn't really how I want to be in the world. And then we can refrain from that behavior because we have some self-respect. But then there's the other one that has more to do with others. And again, the term there is embarrassment. And I think this is kind of misleading too. We just simply I'd prefer terms like consideration for others, that we think about how others might be negatively impacted by what we do or say. And we can think in particular about those who might be looking at us from the perspective of examining us as, who are we and what are we about? And might be in particular in regard to us being Buddhist. After I started teaching as a kind of resident teacher at Thupten Norberling in Santa Fe, I realized how attentive I had to be to my behavior out and about in Santa Fe. Because if I, for example, was at the Whole Foods and got into it in the parking lot with somebody who took offense at the way I parked or drove or whatever, if I became this like thorn in their side, I could have that situation where they might walk into Thupten Norberling someday in the future and go, there's that idiot who was in the parking lot who, yelled at me or whatever. And then they would have a disappointing view of the Dharma. They might walk out and never turn to the Dharma again, never pursue Buddhist teachings again. Now, whether or not people know that about this and they know that about us, that we're Buddhist practitioners, I think still we have to think about it. This second factor is like, what will be the reflection on others if I behave in this way? What will be the effect it has on their minds? And so we have a consideration for others, and that keeps us on the straight and narrow. So these two virtuous mental factors are very operative, especially as we learn the path of virtue and Dharma, is to have that self-respect, that integrity that says, I'm going to uphold these principles and live this way. And I also am going to think of consideration for others and how they might be negatively impacted by the actions that I do. Again, especially even when we think about how our gurus would be very disappointed at that time, the people who are kind of investing a lot and helping us on our path. We want to uphold that, not again out of some misguided motivation, but rather because we want to live by the principles that they hold valuable, because we value them in our lives. So this is the idea behind these. Let's look at what Geshe Jampa Gyatso says in regard to his commentary on verse 23. He says, when it happens that all beings contradict us, that is, when even though our behavior is not bad. Everyone speaks unpleasantly to us, disparages us, and so forth. Without thinking otherwise, think, in my previous rebirths, not being ashamed with respect to anyone, my lamas, parents, friends, siblings, and so forth, I scorned shame. And also when they were embarrassed, I scorned them thinking they are embarrassed. He's got kind of a different way of looking at these two. But the way that I described it is really when we apply these two virtuous mental factors to ourselves. And this being scorn for embarrassment. Again, we don't want to have a mind that is scorning others for having these mindsets either. But anyway, he goes on, says, therefore, these are the bad actions turning against me of committing various non-virtues out of such scorn, looking down on self-respect and consideration for others, but not having practiced that ourselves as well. So then he goes on to say, through understanding this from now on, since every action that does not accord with the Dharma is improper, we should shun them without ever engaging in it through possessing shame and embarrassment. We can say that kind of these are sort of a deeper practice that is really important at the beginning of our kind of following the Dharma, but nonetheless, they become guiding principles for us. When we become more and more acclimated to the Dharma, well, then we have less and less of that thought of this is unbecoming of me or this is not good in terms of the effect on others. We just live by those principles. So it becomes sort of second nature over time. But they're really taught as a major means. And again, the two of what are called the 11 virtuous mental factors that are really important for us to attend to and to become acclimated towards. And then we will have the sort of, not being scorned and what have you that it is, or contradicted by others. Let me see what else was said on here in terms of Geshe-la's other commentary. Didn't really go into that much detail, being criticized, all these sorts of things. It's because we haven't kind of really embraced those two ideas and kind of admired them in others when people have self-respect and a consideration for others. Because it's not just in Buddhism that these principles play out. We just give them these names and identify them as mental factors that are virtuous. But everybody who's practicing a spiritual path to some degree has to have those. They have to have some regard for how the principles they want to live their lives by, as well as the effect that their actions have on others around them, others who practice the same spirituality, as well as other beings that are just in our lives that could be impacted in a negative way from this. And I don't think I had any other slides on this. Oh, I do. I'm sorry. I did have some things from Venerable Chodron. Attachment to reputation and consideration for others are close enemies. I wanted to add this in because I didn't want to forget to make this point. Let me take it off screen for a moment and talk a little bit about this. Sometimes this consideration for others might start looking like we're attached to others thinking good about us or pleasing others and trying to make them. That's not the point of this. The point of this is that we want to really have a genuine regard for them and not think about the effects it's going to have on ourselves. So we don't put on airs again and go around and make everybody, oh, I did such a wonderful thing today, and kind of toot our horn to everybody. We just think about avoiding negativity and doing the good things regardless of whether people are paying attention to us or not. So it's not like we have to have this kind of twisted way of practicing, because we can get attached to a good reputation pretty easily. Remember, this is one of what we call the 8 worldly concerns or 8 worldly dharmas. Attachment to reputation and avoiding a bad reputation. These are the two that kind of play out in regard to this verse. So let's go ahead and take a look at what Venerable Chodron shares on this. She says, attachment to reputation and consideration for others are close enemies, meaning that they might look similar, but they have totally different mindsets behind them. In other words, in some respects, they look similar, but they're actually very different. Attachment to reputation and praise is completely self-centered. We want to look good, while consideration for others is genuinely caring about them, right? It comes down to your motivation. What is your mindset? If we're totally about having others, think well of us because we're behaving so nicely and what have you, well, then that's not the point. The point is to do that because we genuinely care for them and don't want to have a bad effect on them. Whoops. Let's see, what did I do here? Okay, I think everyone's still on the slides, hopefully. I don't know, I hit some weird button there. If our motivation is to be a people pleaser so that we will receive praise, approval, and have a good reputation, when we do not succeed in getting these, our attitude sours and we get angry. In fact, we can determine to what degree that is our motivation by what happens when you don't get that. What happens when people don't say, "Oh, Don, you're such a good person," da 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 da, whatever. When we don't get those strokes, well, then what is it like to be not receiving that? Well, we must have a bad motivation if we feel poorly at those times when people aren't complimenting us. When we have genuine consideration for others, though, we do what we know is best without attachment to reputation. That's the whole point, is like we do it because it's the right thing to do. We don't do it because others will feel better about us or whatever the case might be, and then compliment us and give us awards and whatever the case might be. Let's go on to verse 24. Whenever there is hostility, as soon as our servants gather, there's the servants again. And once more, we can translate this more kind of loosely as being companions, people in our lives, what have you. Though Geshe-la's commentary does kind of keep it treated as servants, but let's go with that idea. Whenever there's hostility, as soon as those around us, companions and so on, gather together, it's the sharp weapons of bad actions turning against us for having plied our miserably bad disposition everywhere, kind of like that old phrase of like raining on everyone else's parade. You know, we kind of just go around and make everyone else miserable through our own misery. Now we should be good natured to everyone. Hard to do sometimes because maybe our lives aren't so wonderful. But if we practice just kind of once more, I mentioned that idea of being an ambassador of love, of loving kindness, of joy, of beneficence with others, then that's how we should be treating others. That's the sort of thing we should be in the world, rather than taking our own miserable stuff, our own kind of moaning and groaning about our own lives and whatever, and making other people have to endure all of that. Again, kind of making life difficult for them. Again, in Geshe Gyatso's commentary, let's go there. He does focus on this idea of servants, but I think we can again expand on this because this isn't meant to be taken just in a really narrow way, but all of these have different dimensions of them. This is said with respect to those of the upper class, such as lords and so forth. But again, I think it can be said for anybody of any class who is just simply dealing with people in their lives who, kind of become hostile whenever they're around us and together with us. Whenever some servants and so forth initially gather around us, but after not much time become hostile, thinking, having plied my miserably bad disposition in all directions, this is the ripening of having acted with hostility toward everyone, kind of been my own little force of hostility or unpleasantness around other people. From now on, without having a bad disposition toward anyone, we should be good-natured, calm, and smiling. Again, I think we have to be careful here because once more, we don't really want to become like hypocrites. We don't want to be like just kind of, oh yeah, everything's fine and smiling and everything, and we're really putting on airs there too to some degree. I mean, if there's a situation where people are genuinely interested in how things are going with us and they seem to have an ear to want to, bend in our direction for us to be able to share what's happening in our lives, then that's great. But if we go around just kind of making things miserable for other people because we're not in such a great mood, things aren't happening well in our life, then that's not very kind. So again, we practice it with the right attitude. The idea is that why should I be this negative cloud, this dark cloud over everyone else when they're all perhaps having a fine day? I'm just going to, be more jovial, a little bit on the lighter side, what have you. I mean, I find I often go for a walk here. Well, here I go here when I get a chance to at my mom's, but in Santa Fe, I go for a walk pretty frequently. And I try to just like wave and say hi to all the people that come by in cars, or certainly other people who are walking their dogs, whatever the case might be. And even if I'm not in a good mood, I find it kind of helps me get out of a bad mood or a feeling like things are, like a lot of things on my mind or whatever. You just kind of be light with people, try to be good natured. Again, I'm using that phrase ambassador of love a bit too much tonight, perhaps. I did a talk with that title, becoming an ambassador of love. But the idea is that that's kind of how we have a generosity of spirit in the world, is that we try to live from this place of being a source of goodwill towards others. And it's an antidote, as I was saying, to us not feeling good about things in our life currently. If we just be in that space of being a kind of trying to light other people's candles, bring a little light into their life rather than just being in the dark all the time and not letting their light shine in either. And I think it becomes reciprocal. The more that we do that, the more we receive from others as well. And even if we don't receive it, it's not a big deal. Like I'll sometimes put my hand up to wave at somebody coming by in the car and they don't even look at me, or they just, they see me, but they don't wave at me. And I just go, that's okay. I mean, at least I can wish them well. I can, have that thought of just holding them in love and light, regardless of what they're doing. So that's the idea, I think, behind here that Geshe-la is trying to get at with that. Again, I don't think I had anything else for that in terms of the slides. Whenever all those who are close to us rise up as our enemies, some of these start sounding kind of a bit similar, but the idea here is it's really a bit stronger in terms of people very near to us, close to us, are suddenly not just hostile, there may be even more than that. There are enemies. It's a sharp weapon of bad actions turning against us for having entertained bad thoughts about them. Now we should work to diminish. He's pointing out two things, Dharma-Rakshita, in this last thing: deceitfulness and guile. These are two, the translation of this gets to be a little weird because sometimes you'll see them referred to as dissimulation and deceit, but I'm going to talk about those in a moment. But the idea here is that we create a sort of karma, and again, it's hard to say. This is where in some of these we can say that it's not that the cause it's being delineated by Dharma-Rakshita is that specific, but it's something that can contribute to a lot of this. So we can have, of course, people rising up, our companions and what have you, as enemies in particular times due to us having created an animosity towards them in the past. So that's not to be denied, that is a potential karma that we've created. But here what's being set out as the two main causes that we need to kind of engage in avoiding are deceitfulness, which again, sometimes just deceit, but dissimulation. Dissimulation and deceit are kind of identified as two separate ways that we have a false appearance to others. Deceit is where we kind of claim good qualities that we don't have. We're making a false statement in terms of what we possess. So we kind of put on airs. We're deceitful. It's a bit like that hypocrisy, we're kind of pretending to be more than what we are. Dissimulation, though, is where we pretend to not have faults that we currently possess. So we hide our faults. So these two are kind of operating, hiding our faults and exaggerating our qualities. Again, it's a bit of the deprecation and the exaggeration that we spoke of earlier as well, that we're sometimes receiving and that we're doing with others. Well, here we're doing this with ourselves, where we're really not being genuine in terms of what our own qualities or faults are. As I was alluding to earlier, it's important also to be really honest with ourselves around this and with others, and to not kind of, again, put on airs either way, to think that I'm the worst person in the world or that I'm the best person in the world, but just to be sincere and genuine and just, acknowledge the faults that we have. When people point them out, don't have this prideful mind that isn't willing to admit to having those faults. And when people point out our good qualities, don't have the inflated mind that thinks, oh, I must be really great. They noticed how wonderful I am, but rather just acknowledge, yes, I'm trying to work on that. And I still need a lot of work to do, but I can acknowledge I've done some work on being kinder, more generous, whatever the case might be. So it's interesting. Let's look at how Geshe-la explains working with this verse and the karma that we've created and that we're potentially creating, or by avoiding the opposite karma that we're creating by avoiding the faults that led to that. When there's suffering due to even our lamas and others who are close to us, not pleasing us, and due to all our friends and so forth who were previously close to our heart, rising up as our enemies, think, this is the bad actions turning against me of, in previous rebirths, directly inflicting harm upon others out of bad thoughts, or not being able to do that, entertaining only bad thoughts, thinking, may the ability to harm them arise. Then meditate on taking and giving. Again, taking that others who are experiencing a similar suffering, giving them happiness. And he says then from now on, we should never do actions of dissimulation and deceit. Again, dissimulation and deceit, a little bit different than the meaning of guile. Guile is kind of more in the line of deceit. It's kind of a treacherous cunning, is how it's defined. But nonetheless, if we think about these two mental factors, these are two of what are called the secondary afflictions. They are negative states of mind that are all about, again, hiding our faults or exaggerating our qualities. False pretense. Pretension is often used as a synonym for deceit. So the idea here is that there's a connection there karmically between that type of mindset and this result of other people rising at our enemies. It's not as clear to see. We are getting into that territory where some of these are not as evident. But he does talk about, again, that this can be the bad actions ripening upon me of my having inflicted harm on others or wishing to do so. But we should abandon any mindsets that lead us down that pathway. Let's try to do one more verse at least. We're going to catch up gradually, I think, to where we need to be in terms of my original schedule, because I did get off a little bit last week. Whenever we are sick with consumption and edema, it is the sharp weapons of bad actions turning against us for having unconscientiously misused donations against the rules. This is another one we'll look at it and go, wow, what is that about? Now we should abandon misappropriating property and the like. What's being talked about in this verse compared to the next verse you'll see at the bottom of the screen is about our body being struck suddenly by a contagious disease. The top one, the one we're going to discuss now, has more to do with chronic conditions, apparently, while the next one has more to do with acute conditions. Now, we can say that in general, all of these physical things, we saw that way back in verse 10, right? The very first of these verses, when we looked at the fact that whenever there's suffering in the body, it's due to us having inflicted harm on others. Well, that's kind of a given. What's being talked about here again, and the way I interpret a lot of this that we're getting into now in this territory, is like subtler things that also have some karmic influence on that. And in this case, it's particularly having misappropriated or misused resources. Particularly, it's said in the commentary, resources that belong to the three jewels. Now, again, when we talk about Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, certainly they're embodied within our gurus. So certainly the resources of our gurus are to be respected and never misappropriated or misused. But even in terms of the Sangha, we want to be very careful around that. Sangha technically are those beings who have higher realizations, who've achieved a direct realization of emptiness and so on. But in a more conventional way, we talk about any 4 fully ordained monks or nuns being representative of the Sangha. But if you have even an established religious community, spiritual community, such as the center there, Oso Shenpen Ling, any of these Dharma centers, we often loosely use the term Sangha to refer to those. We have to be careful about not abusing resources that are given to those organizations, because they are there to benefit the Dharma and the community and to support it. At Thupten Norbu Ling, I would often mention to people, because oftentimes there'd be boxes out front where people would bring in books from their library that they were ready to hand over to the center in order for the center to either sell them to make money or to put them on the bookshelves or whatever. And by the way, sell them, I mean more or less to have them there as for people to offer, because we usually don't sell Dharma in kind of that way, things that are donated. But the idea is that when people donate things to the center, you might think, well, this is going to go in the library. I might as well just take a look and see if there's something in here that I want first before they give it to the library. Well, but it's already there. It's already being given to the library. Even those small things of like taking something that would have ended up in the library of a Dharma center is creating a bit of that negative karma of not respecting that something is being offered to support the Dharma, proliferating, continuing to offer what we do, and so on. So you have to be very mindful of that when we're dealing with resources around Dharma, in particular at centers. Make sure that we're not abusing things in any way. So let's go ahead and look at Geshe-la's commentary on that. And again, this is kind of an interesting one because how that ripens is in terms of us having a chronic illness. This gets to be a little hard karmically to kind of line these two up. But let's see what Geshe-la says. When a grave illness in general suddenly strikes us, and when a type of contagious disease such as malaria and so forth strikes our body, we should think, this is the sharp weapons of the bad actions committed in this life and in previous rebirths of performing deeds that degenerated my pledges. In short, it is necessary to guard them tightly, just as we have promised. Think, this is the bad actions turning against me, of not guarding them in that way, and especially of degenerating my pledges with respect to my Lama. Again, in some of the other commentaries, point out with regard to the three jewels in general, the Lama, the Guru being the representative of all three jewels in our lives. Then meditate on taking and giving. From now on, we should completely abandon non-virtuous actions in general and the actions that degenerate our pledges in particular. So again, when we make pledges, and this is another, I think, pledges, vows, commitments, this is a way of upholding the commitment that we have to our gurus. So whenever we're kind of acting in contrary to those, we are creating a negative karma that can ripen into those sorts of actions, sorts of results that we experience. I don't know if I had much else on this. It is interesting that Geshe Chonyi, who's the abbot of Kopan right now, he says that these sort of sicknesses that are being talked about in this verse refers to those that interfere with one's practice of Dharma in general. Though there are specific illnesses that are mentioned. The idea being that anything where we've created kind of an obstacle to having a continuity of our Dharma practice through illness and whatever, it's because we haven't tended to our relationship to the three jewels, to the gurus in a proper way, and possibly, again, even abused the resources of the three jewels. I think I may have one or two things to share on that, and then we'll do our discussion. Geshe Sopa says, again, we must recognize that we cause this by our past actions, by our unsympathetic attitude and negative feelings towards others. Such behavior stems from this was verse 25. This was the previous verse. Such behavior stems from selfishness, lack of empathy, and insensitivity to others. We should blame ourselves and not others for the situation, resolve to act without deceit and hidden grudges in the future. Again, that was the one that had to do with deceit and dissimulation. Verse 26, actually, I don't have anything for that. But again, it was interesting. Some of the commentaries seem to highlight this idea of our relationship with the three jewels, though Geshe-la tended to say mostly around our gurus and the commitments and vows that we have. This is where, just as a footnote to this, if you haven't taken any vows, it's really important that you feel prepared to take vows, that you're ready to kind of hold that commitment to the gurus that give us those vows, which go back to the Buddha himself. So we have a whole lineage of these vows having made it into our lives and are very powerful ways for us to be able to achieve enlightenment. But nonetheless, they are also very dangerous, and that the negativities that we have from them can be very severe if we have transgressions of those vows. So it's important to study the vows. We have the 5 lay vows that are very easy to study. We have the Bodhisattva vows that you also can study, and we did go through those in Exploring Buddhism that all of you, many of you, took part in. And then tantric vows can't be really studied in advance, but nonetheless, if we have some conviction in our ability to practice vows and hold them purely from before, I think we can go into that with some determination to hold those purely as well. All right, we're going to do the discussion, but let me just see if there's any questions before any. Yes, Ruth, please.
Are vows and precepts the same?
You know, they just use the word precepts, and they're kind of the same. Sometimes we use these interchangeably, like precepts, commitments, vows. The Sanskrit word is samaya. Again, different things will have different heaviness based on how they are given, but we usually refer to any of the vows as being precepts In some contexts, it's not as heavy. Like if you studied, I think you were there, Ruth, when we studied the 7-point mind training in the mind training module of Exploring Buddhism. There's one whole part that says the precepts of mind training, but those aren't really vows that we're making. And then there's another section called the commitments of mind training, and those are also not necessarily vows. So there's different ways that we use those terms where they're not identical. But in this context where it says precepts, then again, I think that we can take that as meaning vows and them being equal. You know, we often refer to the person who gives the vows as being our preceptor, and that's the role that they play in transmitting those vows to us. But we don't really get, again, those unless you engage in a formal ceremony where you are on the receiving end of those. Now, Bodhisattva vows, it's kind of exceptional. They do say that you can take them on your own initially in certain circumstances, but usually we go to a preceptor, somebody who gives us those. But in this context, we're definitely talking about those sorts of things. But I would say, again, anytime that we agree to do something that a guru or lama has told us to do, I mean, like some people go to Lama Zopa, they did. 1 second. Yeah, Mom?
You're still with
Yeah, I'll be out in a minute. Okay, all right. My mom's getting ready for bed. So, like if you go to Lama Zopa or did go to Lama Zopa or go to any other teacher and you say, oh, I'd like to know some practices that I should do in this life, what are often called lifetime practices that you think will be good for me, and they actually give you something and you agree to doing that, then you've made a commitment to them. It's not really a vow per se, but it's something that has weight to it because you have said, yes, I will do this to them. So you have to do your best to fulfill those sorts of commitments. So I don't know if I gave you more of an answer than maybe what you were looking for, Ruth, but any of these terms, precepts, commitments, vows, they all have a heaviness to them. But again, it depends upon the context, whether they're equal or not. Okay.
Oh, that was great. I did have one other question too.
Mhm.
When you talk about scorn, it
Mhm.
does that sort of mean like judgment, being judgmental too? Is that?
I suppose it could. Again, the idea there, I think when the verse where that was used was like when we're criticized, when people are scornful of us and what have you. But obviously, yeah, any sort of judgmental things that we do with regard to others or that they do with regard to us, I think that could be included in there. Yeah. Anything else? Thank you, Ruth. All right, so I'm going to stay around and kind of come in for the be just kind of again a fly on the wall during the discussion and come in to wrap things up and do the prayers. But I am going to go help my mom get to bed, and you all can discuss the questions. Again, there was one question from last week. I'll put it on the screen that had to do with verse 17. That's the third question. What are bad friends mentioned? What does it mean to reject them? Just to go through that. And then we had 3 questions, verses 22, 23. We didn't get to 28. So you really just have 3 questions tonight. These 2, first 2 there, and then the third one there. All right. And I'll leave that in Bill's very capable hands. Did you have something more, Ruth? Or?
Yeah, tell your mom hi.
Okay, I will do that.
How old is she?
She's 93.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, tell her hi and we're thinking of her.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'm here because my brother's having surgery. He's back in St. Louis. If you can think of him on Thursday morning, 7:30 Central Time, he's going under the knife for heart surgery, actually. So we're all, hoping that all goes well. So any prayers there would be appreciated. So, but I'll pass along the hello. All right, I'll be back in about 20 minutes.
Okay, everybody. So I guess we're going to start with verse 17, which I'll read. Whenever all the holy ones are unhappy with us, it is the sharp weapons of bad actions turning against us. For having rejected the holy and relied upon bad friends, now we should reject bad friends. So, who wants to chat a little bit about this? Allie and I were kind of talking about it earlier.
I guess I will.
Go ahead.
Yeah, this is amazing. I mean, I would have never thought that something called the Wheel of Sharp Weapons that the teaching on it would be something that I experience like honey or like nectar, and I really do. So I'm amazed by that. And oh, I can, truly, definitely see this. Having been at play in my life, and it makes things make a lot of sense. And I'm fully willing to grasp this concept and the whole concept of, I can think of as this teaching is happening, one person in my life who I would say, does tend to have that role, but I wasn't really clearly aware of it until this teaching. But the whole concept of, this is somebody that I need to not actively have in my life, but not cast out of my mind and heart, and keep prayerful intention and compassion for them. But full on. I love these explanations of some of the karmic consequences I've certainly experienced. So that's all I'll say.
Anybody else have anything to share about bad friends? I think that there's degrees to this one. So, like, there's degrees to all of them. And also your intention, what's your motivation? But go ahead, Ruth.
Well, I always thought of bad friends as, people outside myself, but when he mentioned tonight, it's the internal bad friends, that was sort of a, oh yeah, oh, those, the self-grasping and the self-cherishing, which are the really, really bad friends that you don't even notice that you have all the time. And yeah, that was, to me, when she said that tonight, it was like, oh yeah, oh, those. Yeah.
Yeah, the subtlest level of bad friends. Maybe not the subtlest, but pretty subtle.
Well, and powerful,
Yeah.
And honestly, this whole path in Buddhism, is just peeling back the onion, peeling back the layers, and getting to the heart of the matter, and realizing, the heart of the matter is, right in here, right in here. I mean, it's not outside, it's inside. But anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And I'd say that's like the most important thing to realize about like your bad friends is, there's a difference between helping one of your bad friends through a life problem and allowing them to talk you into breaking your vows. So keep that in mind. Let's go to verse 22. We've got about 15 minutes. And this one, I think, hit a lot of nerves. When our Lama is not pleased, no matter what we do, it is the sharp weapons of bad actions turning against us for having acted hypocritically toward the holy Dharma. Now we should work to reduce our hypocrisy regarding the Dharma. Anybody who hasn't piped in yet want to address this one? This just reminds me of Rabina. So I've had multiple people ask me about Rabina not being pleased with me in the past. So, and I mean, I think this one really hits at self-cherishing for me, especially reputation. just because I think all of us, you know, really want our teachers to have a high opinion of us, and that is our ego and our self-cherishing mind that wants that to happen. So yeah, I always just kind of look at it as a blessing when this happens, when I get yelled at by a teacher. So it's uncomfortable. I don't enjoy it. But
So
that's
can I,
because I'm very attached to my reputation, which was a very big topic tonight. So go ahead, Nanda.
so if I could just go on with this little thread of conversation here, because I actually still personally have some unsettledness around those exchanges. And I don't know her at all personally. I've been to her teachings, you know, and I know she's a pretty feisty little unit. But what I'm having a hard time keeping in balance, or like seeing it all come together, is holding you in benevolence. I'll put it in my own terms for me personally. When I'm with a person that I'm having a difficulty with, and I don't really care for their behavior, especially with when I was raising my kids, yeah, the behavior stinks, and you don't want a little kid to be doing that anymore. But yelling and being denigrating and kind of taking them out at the knees, especially publicly, versus a compassionate way of saying the same message, but delivering it in a different way. Like, where's the softness? Where's the compassion? Where's the...
I guess, so how I'd respond to that is, you know, this is specifically referring to your Lama. So, and I would interpret that as somebody that, I mean, you've had a personal conversation with, and you've said, I would like you to be my teacher. And I think that's really, you never really know who has that relationship with a Lama. And so I think sometimes when I mean, it's not just her, but other Lamas and other teachers, you know, people have their own relationship, you know, and I'm always kind of amazed at the Lama's ability to know what a person seems to need in a given moment. And usually, in my experience, I don't think I've ever seen somebody who really needed, you know, love and compassion not receive that. And most of the times that I've seen people not receive that, it's because, yeah, just because of, I don't know, that their actions aren't genuine, which is exactly, I think, what we're talking about here, is like hypocrisy. So, you know, I think we've all been to tons of teachings and seen how teachers deal with different people depending on what they're asking. And sometimes I don't think people are being genuine. And I think the Lamas are usually really good at figuring that out, and they deal with it in different ways, but it's usually pretty skillful. But in my particular case with Robina, you know, I've asked her to have that relationship with me, because that's what I know that I need is, you know, when my ego is, you know, coming up, like, she's there to remind me. And also I think it's good because you know, I have a lot of issues with joyous effort and doing things correctly. And so sometimes, I'm not as well prepared ahead of time as I should be. And even though in the moment I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, if there's a mistake, it's usually because I didn't think about it enough ahead of time. And so even though it looks like I'm doing what I should be doing, it's just me trying to cover my butt. So, and she's really good at noticing that and being like, this is what you should be doing, but you should have been doing it like earlier and then you would have known. And so anyway, that's a little more information than I think is necessary.
Yeah, no, it's helpful. It's very helpful because what I got out of it was first thing is it's sort of like messing in another person's marriage, right? You should there's no hopeful way of being successful with messing with a marriage person's relationship. It's like, just stay out of it. It's between those two people. They're doing what they're doing and you may be observing it, but through your own perception, and it's none of your business. So just stand down.
Mm-hmm. I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, well, and the other thing I have to say is that I personally have yet to sort of identify that guru person, right? So I don't really know anything about the relationship because I don't have that. I haven't made that, whatever that is, commitment or choice or.
Well, you definitely will know in the moment, I think. But yeah, I'm still not sure who my root guru is, I guess. But I've definitely accepted a few people as Dharma teachers, and so I have that relationship with them. And some of those teachers, I have a friendship with them too, and that's almost like a different thing. It's almost like, for me, I feel like I'm friends with the person, but like there's this other part of them that represents the guru, which is the Buddha. And when we're in that space, I should have that kind of respect. I think that a lot of gurus do that in order to make a connection with people, and hopefully I'll be connected with those gurus in future lives. So, because I'm not getting it done right now.
So the only,
sorry, go ahead. Last one, and then we're moving on to the last question.
Does anybody else have anything else they want to say?
This is a touchy subject, I think. Especially
no, not about this, like just in general.
Oh, in general.
I guess not. So I'll just say this one thing that's not about teachers or whatever. Through a series of happenstances, I've ended up with 3 different translations of this document, which has really is turning out to be one of the most fascinating aspects of this class. Because each one of the translations, and they're all legitimate, or, whatever, they've all got their credentials are pretty tight, I would say. But the flavor of each of them, of the different 3s, is pretty remarkable, actually. Like the nuance of the language and whatnot, which is one of the most interesting things about this class to me. The fact that I've got these 3 different translations. Very interesting. Just saying.
I think that's helpful to do that, because it kind of gives you, if it doesn't confuse you, I would say then that's good, because it can help you to kind of pull a little bit more meaning out of the text. And I rely on that kind of thing a lot, because I think it's very easy for us to, as I think Nanda points out pretty frequently, kind of fit square pegs in round holes when it comes to translations. So this next verse is 23. I don't know if we're going to get to 28. We'll see. Did we get to 28? No. So this is it. So whatever it happens that we are contradicted by everyone. I thought that was kind of interesting. Everyone. It is the sharp weapons of bad actions turning against us For having scorned shame and embarrassment, now we should shun that which is improper. Did we do this one, or did I jump ahead? We did, yeah. This is the last one. Okay. I've studied this before, so I don't remember. Yeah, so I thought that was interesting, just like that, when you feel the world is against you kind of thing. Anybody want to talk about this one? No one's ever had this happen at work, I'm sure. What about shame and embarrassment? Does that seem a little heavy?
Well, I think it's such an endemic human experience, and so uncomfortable. To me, this is really like the heart of what karmic reality is all about, right? So I got fired from a job. I've gotten fired more than once. Most people have. And it's got to be somebody else's fault, right? It couldn't have been me. I could not possibly have done anything to get fired. That's like horrendous. Well, I mean, what the stanza is saying is like, no, you don't have the luxury of ever looking outside as the agent of your distress. Right? It's not an option. So if it's not an option, that's incredibly tough.
Yeah, this one's really big for me just because I have such attachment to my reputation. I mean, I never really thought I did, and then like the more I practice Dharma, the more I see how strong my attachment is to it. It's by far my strongest attachment. But yeah, I think getting fired is a really good example. Because just that kind of rejection, yeah, really hits that. Yeah. It's a sharp weapon.
being divorced, right?
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
Or not getting a call back from the guy, 3 weeks of dating into it, and then he just never calls back. It's like, what? Couldn't have been me.
Yeah. Might not have been you right now, I guess, is what we should be thinking.
It's just.
Have you ever been fired, Don? I don't feel like Don's ever been fired. I have this feeling.
You're too kind. Maybe there's no comment on that.
Okay. Yeah, shouldn't find fault with the teacher.
I mean, there certainly there was at least one situation where I felt like, yeah, there was, maybe it wasn't as appropriate as I don't know. But yeah, let's just let it at that, because I don't want to go any further.
But just hang on a second there, because that's just a present time, actual, real example of how difficult it is.
It has a reflection on another Dharma center, so I don't want to go there.
No. I'm not talking about that part of it. Is the incidentals are irrelevant, but how to cope with this, the shame that results when somebody else doesn't like what you're doing. It's like, it's horrible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought I'd share what the way that Venerable Chodron talks about this. Let's see, I get to her comments on this verse where We experience situations where people do not believe us, lack confidence in us, or doubt the wisdom of our decisions. I like the way that she talks about it again, because she broadens it out to these situations, which again can be where, yeah, people don't have confidence in us. They fire us. They don't believe us. They don't have, that trust in us to be who we are or whatever. And so it's hard because we have to look at our own stuff then. We have to sort of face up to that reality. And yeah, I mean, there's a karma that's behind it, obviously, but even in the moment, there can be factors that are influencing that. That's the conditions. We often talk about karma being the main cause, but the conditions being another factor that allows that karma to ripen. So anyway, that's a tough one, but I appreciate the comments. I might mention, I think what Bill said in terms of, I did hear the bit about the guru and that, and I think it is important that we acknowledge that phrase when it says our Lama, I mean, it really means somebody who you've sort of entrusted to play that role. And so you've got, with Venerable Rabina, for example, I mean, I have seen her with strangers, people who are brand new to her teachings, coming in and having a bit of a difficult time with the way that she approaches some subjects and what have you. But it's not maybe quite the same karma, but nonetheless, I mean, they might have ripening of their past karma from having done that in another life. But if we're in a position where we're entrusting our spiritual care to a particular person, then I think we have to have that ability to see whatever they're doing as a lesson for us, just in the same way that in this text, we're looking at what karma is ripening as a lesson for us. The gurus are always teaching. It's just a matter of whether we're paying attention and taking it that way. So, but yeah, I think this is important that we actually look at these teachings and see the layers of meaning. And I like what you shared, Nanda, too, about the different translations, because you will see if you do have, and Thupten Jinpa's translation is readily available, even if you don't want to buy any of the books that it's in at a website. Maybe I'll give that link to Colleen to put there so you can go and get his translation if you'd like. Then there's the original one that I worked with way back that was by John Landau and Alex Berzin and these guys. And it's more of a teaching in the commentary. I think you brought one of those in previously, Nanda, and it kind of encapsulates some other understanding rather than just a literal translation of the words. But they're all helpful, and they're all different ways of getting different meaning because of different word usage and translation equivalents. So, okay. Any final comments or questions? Because we do need to wrap things up. But anyway, thank you, Bill, for coordinating the discussion and for hosting tonight. Let's go ahead and do our final dedication prayers. So, due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. And then the prayers for our precious teachers, and we're just talking about this relationship that many of us have that is ideal, they say, to support us on our spiritual path with our gurus. So any of our gurus who are still with us in the physical form that we are benefiting from, such as His Holiness the Dalai Lama, may they continue to be in this world with good health and long lives. And let's recite this prayer for His Holiness to solidify that intention. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then a prayer for Rinpoche's swift return, seeing how much most of us in the organization have connected with Rinpoche and his lifetime when he was here benefiting us, that we want to create the causes for his reappearance, for him to continue to guide us. We have to do that from our side because there's no intention to abandon us from the side of Rinpoche. It's us creating the causes karmically through our merit and our strong prayers to be able to benefit from his presence again in this world. Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, Victorious Losang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the Victorious One's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss! Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the Victorious Ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. And let's dedicate for beings that we're holding in our hearts. Again, we've touched on the subject of Israel and Gaza and this, area of great strife and suffering right now, and then also other parts of the world where Ukraine, where there's war and unbelievable violence that beings are inflicting on each other. So we can make strong prayers dedicating for that suffering to be removed for those beings, but also any other beings that we're holding in our hearts right now. Individuals who are experiencing sickness, obstacles, who are dying or who have died. Send this positive energy out to these beings. Again, in the spirit of Tonglen, we're giving it all to them, not holding back anything for ourselves, but rather wanting them to be free of their sufferings through our giving them all our merit. And then also think that it creates the causes for them to meet with the Dharma, to find all of the causes of true happiness and practice the entire path, become enlightened quickly. And may this be so for all beings. Okay, thank you all so much. Enjoyed being with you again tonight. And I'll be here from my mother's again for the next couple weeks, at least. I think 3 weeks in total, 3 Tuesdays. So after tonight, believe it or not. So anyway, thank you all for your prayers for my brother. I do appreciate it. And I hope your mother's doing okay, Ruth. I just wanted to give a shout out to your mother as well. Is she all right? She's doing
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah, she's 95 and weighs 76 pounds, but I don't know. She's tough.
Just hanging in there.
Yep.
We'll give her my love as well.
I will thank you very
All
much.
right. Blessings to you all. I'll see you next Tuesday. Thanks again, Phil. Okay.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye.